Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn. So tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 101, the Devadaha Sutta.
So this sutta is about causality, specifically pointing to the Buddhist way of understanding causality and developing a path in contradistinction to the Jain view of understanding causality. So Nigantanataputta is the Mahavira. That's how he's referred to in the Pali Canon. And here the Buddha reports the Niganta's view, so the Jain view, that everything that one experiences, all feelings, whether pleasant, painful, or neutral, can be attributed to past actions. And the Buddha he's relating to the monastics, that he went up to the Jains and says, is this what you believe? And they say, yes. And it's by engaging in tapas or austerities that we wear away past action. And then by wearing away past action, we wear away feeling. And then by wearing away feeling, we'll wear away all suffering. And the Buddha asks that that's what the Jains believe. They say yes. And then he asks him, do you know whether you existed in the past? And they say no. Do you know whether you did evil in the past? And they have to admit that they don't know that. And then he asks them finally if they know how to abandon unwholesome states and to cultivate wholesome states in the present. And they say they don't know any of this. Then the Buddha gives a simile of a dart. So if someone was shot with a poisoned dart or a poisoned arrow, then a doctor was to come in and in a rather gruesome and elaborately described this simile, basically dig out the arrow and cauterize around the wound and pull it out with lots of exertion. But once all of that had been done, then the person would be healed. Next, the Buddha kind of asks the Jains if their teacher, Mahavira, he does purport omniscience. And they ask them if they know that Mahavira is omniscient. They say they don't. The Buddha then elaborates 5 causes for a belief in something, and positing and questioning the Jains. Why is it that you have faith in Mahavira, in your teacher? And he says that someone can have a trust or a confidence in a teacher, either based on faith, and this list comes up in the Chunky Sutta as well. So faith or saddha, approval or ruchi, anusava or oral tradition, akara paravitaka or reason cognition or reflective acceptance of a view. That each of these 5 can be either true or false, and basically they can't answer what the basis of their trust in Mahavira is. Then the Buddha goes into 10 reasons why that belief is censurable. And it's fascinating because it points to incorrect views of causality. So if it is the case that everything that one experiences now, including pain, is caused by past actions, then that view is censurable whether or not it's true. Because if it was true, then it means that what they'd done in the past was bad, and so therefore it's censurable. Whereas if it's false, it's censurable because it's false. Secondly, if there was a God who preordained that they were going to suffer, if that's the mechanism of causality, then it's censurable whether it's true. If it's true, it means it's a bad God. And if it's false, it's censurable because it's false. The third is just by chance, and it's censurable if it's true because it means they have bad luck. And if it's false, it's censurable because it's false. It could be because of their birth, abhijati. It's censurable because it means if it's true, that they had a bad birth, and if it's false, because it's false. And then finally, exertion in the present life, if they're experiencing, because it's false. And then finally, if it's true that they had a bad birth, and if it's false, because it's false. And then finally, exertion, true that they had a bad birth, and if it's false, because it's false. And then finally, exertion, true that they had a bad birth, and if it's false, because it's false. And then finally, exertion in the present life, if they're experiencing suffering because of that, it's censurable. And if it's not true, it's also censurable. And the Buddha points to his own system of causality, and specifically the mechanisms of escaping from causality, of bringing about wholesome mind states. and specifically says there's a time for exertion and a time for equanimity, and that a practitioner needs to know which time to do what. And he gives a simile of an arrow maker heating up a arrow, and then once the arrow is heated and is bent to the proper proportion, straightened properly, then they don't heat it anymore. So too, you use exertion as long as exertion is helpful. And one might realize, the Buddha says, that when I live at my ease, unwholesome qualities increase and wholesome qualities diminish. So if you're just sitting around on your couch watching Netflix all day and unwholesome qualities are increasing, you need to put forth some effort and give that up. And then once you've put forth the effort, then you can just watch on with equanimity. And the Buddha then gives a drawn out elaboration of what the practice is. First, you gain faith, and then you practice noble ethics, giving up that which is immoral. And when one does that, one experiences the bliss of blamelessness. Practicing sense restraint, one experiences the bliss of being unsullied. And then one abandons the hindrances, goes to the foot of a tree, develops the jhanas, and cultivates the happiness, the sukha. So there is sukha on the path. So the Buddha elaborates this gradual path leading into enlightenment, to clear seeing. Fascinating sutta, great elaboration of hetu, or causality. So, Ajahn, what would you like to bring out in this sutta?
So I think kind of clear understanding of this discourse requires a bit of context, specifically with how some of these terms are being used in the belief systems at work. The Jains, the disciples of Naganta Nataputta, had a belief that karma was these kind of particles that followed the jiva, the soul, and could only be burnt off through fervent mortification. So they engaged in intense ascetic practices, basically culminating in starving themselves. So the Buddha was quite critical of this sect, not just because of the intensity and extremism of that practice, but of a certain nihilism hidden in that belief. And I think we can look down on the Jains and think, what kind of backwards people they were, and forget that our own, that mental inclination towards self-mortification is quite deep in humans, and certainly in moderns. The tendency towards self-flagellation, towards a deep self-hatred, to be honest, which sort of has often unspoken logic that if we mortify ourselves, if we are hard enough on ourselves, if we, basically have an internal asceticism or mortification, we won't be bad again or something. And this, I believe, is partially the result of a Judeo-Christian heritage for many of us, but also the perhaps symptom of consumerist culture, where much of the drive to purchase is predicated on not feeling good enough. So just to say, we're not so different from the Jains sometimes in those deep inclinations. This is relevant. The sutta can be a bit confusing at first also, because we understand the Buddha did teach that past action has results. So what is he criticizing with the Jains here? And I think one way of understanding what he's critical of is the idea that all present feeling is predicated completely on past action and their fruits of past action. The principle of causality, the way that our present experience manifests in Buddhism, is kind of predicated on what we call idappaccayata, this, that conditionality. When this is, that is. When this arises, that arises. When this isn't, that isn't. When this ceases, that ceases. Which can seem somewhat esoteric, but to note that when this is, that is. When this isn't, that isn't, are both concurrent principles. When something arises, sometimes it arises in tandem with something at the same moment. If you stick your hand in a fire, pain arises at that moment. When this arises, that arises. When this ceases, that ceases, is temporal. So you do an action, you throw a stone up, and in a little bit it comes back down. And it's a very simple equation, but what it means is our present experience is the result of past action, the fruits of past action manifesting, which is what the Jains also are espousing here. but also because of that principle paired with that of concurrent conditionality. When this is, that is. When this ceases, that is, ceases. Our present experience is also the result of our present intention and the result of that present intention manifesting right now, which is why, as we practice, for example, you can still experience, say, painful feelings from a past action, from sickness. And if you hold that with right view, with mindfulness, it doesn't actually affect your heart in the same way. We have the ability to influence how we feel the results of past action. This is one way the Buddha is pointing to the fact that we're not complete victims of our past action. And insofar as we are subject to the past action, we can alter how that manifests through our present intention and through our present exertion, not in the very particular form that it takes with the Jains, which is what he's critical of these tapas, these austerities, which are almost ritualistically mortifying, but rather through, as he expounds in the latter half of the discourse, through applying equanimity where it's useful, such as the man who decides that he doesn't want to overwhelm himself with suffering because he's just looking at the woman he's jealous about all the time and giving up greed and lust for her, through applying austerity at appropriate times when it's useful, like that archer straightening the arrow, but then between two fires, but then after the arrow's straight, he no longer has to do it. Or not being afraid of dharmic pleasure, in the sense of the path the Buddha lays out through the jhanas and through the training, that the Buddha says there is an appropriate place for using each of these feelings in our practice, just holding it with wisdom and understanding the power of our present intention and action to alter the results of past action, how we feel them here and now. Kind of digging down to a very core principle at the heart of Buddhism, but basically the Buddha was very critical of those who denied the efficacy of our action here and now and of our ability to change how we experience the world and how we can move into it with a cleansed heart and mind. So Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is hetu, which means cause or condition, and we find it a lot in Buddhism. In fact, the dependent origination is all based on causes, hetu, and condition, paccaya, and it's the basis for the Four Noble Truths. And here we find different elaborations of fate, whether that's based on God's determined fate or predetermination or chance or all these other possible conditionality or non-conditionality. But hetu, a good word to know.
And I do not hate you, Ajahn.
Oh, thanks, Ajahn.
We'll see you on Mission Majjhima Zoom in a second. Otherwise, next week for Majjhima Nikaya 102. Ajahn?
Ajahn.